Super excited to have Dr. Frank here with us today. I think she'll tell her story. I do want to highlight a couple of things she may not mention. She's an assistant research professor at University of Hawaii, Manoa, and based out of the Pacific Biosciences Research Center. She was raised here on Oahu in Kailua area. I think she'll probably tell you some of that story. She got her bachelor degree at the University of Rochester, New York. Graduated magna cum laude with distinction in research in molecular genetics. And then she went into Harvard University where she got her PH.D. in molecular cell biology with Peter Gurgis. I met her in 2019 at the Pu'uhonua o Pu'uhuluhulu, which is a Mauna Kea protest site on the Big Island. One of the things, I took my son to visit and see that and experience that. One of the things I really loved there is how dedicated the Hawaiian protester group was on educating. Everybody who came, educating Hawaiian culture, history, the protocols, really a magnificent learning opportunity. For me, the highlight, I happened to be there on a day that Kiana Frank was there. I absolutely just loved her presentation. Obviously a very bright scientist. I'm not really at all. But she has just a gift for explaining this deep, complicated science in very simple, understandable, and motivating ways. I learned about sustainability, came away very motivated, excited, and really just enthralled by her presentation. It was so much fun. I thought about, as I watched her and heard her story, I thought about you students here at BYU Hawaii. And I hope that you come away from this inspired by her. Here's an incredibly bright native Hawaiian using her knowledge, her talents, abilities to learn and spread Hawaiiana and also sustainability. And I'm confident you will enjoy your presentation. I'm confident you'll learn about sustainability, but I really hope that you come away from this inspired to go all out. Learn everything you can here at the university. Prepare yourself so that as you go home to your home countries, that you can take your knowledge, your skills, your talents to bless those communities and your homelands. So with that, I give to you Dr. Kiana Frank.
Aloha mai kākou. Oh, it's such a beautiful day. I'm so happy to be here in this ahupua'a of La'iewai. I am named after La'iewai, so it's nice to be back in this aina. I am originally from Kailua. I grew up in Kailua, Ko'olapoko, just one moku over, a couple ahupua'a down the road. And when I was a little girl, my great-grandmother told me the mo'olelo of the lepo ai'ia, the edible mud of Kauai Nui Marsh. She told me that mud was so ono. It tasted like the sweetest, freshest pa'iai you could ever imagine. Color me intrigued, right? My favorite food right in my backyard. She told me that the only way to harvest the mud was you had to be absolutely quiet. If you uttered even a single word, the mud would hide from you forever. When I got a little older, the story changed a little bit. Like my grandma changed the story. She said if I uttered even one single word, the mud would cover me up, suck me down, and you'd never hear from me ever again. So, I was like really stoked on this mo'olelo. The idea that I could go into my backyard and harvest the most delicious pa'iai I could imagine. The food that fed all of Kailua, the food that fed Kamehameha and his warriors when he sailed into Kailua Bay for that battle at Nu'uanu. Oh man, I was intrigued. So, a very quiet little Kiana went out with her bucket and shovel, and I tasted a ton of mud. The red mud, the black mud, the green mud, the gray mud, all the muds that were not so delicious. But it was in that process where I started to kilo and ask questions about my environment, right? I started to make observations and connect to my space. Like, why did the green mud taste like limu? And why did the red mud taste like, you know, like when you bite the inside of your mouth? Yeah, like that flavor. And why did the black mud, guys, you guys ever smelled black mud? Yeah. Not good, not delicious. I started really wondering, like, where was this lepo'ai'ia that I heard so much about, that Kailua was known for, that people from other islands made fun of us for? They called people of Oahu the dirt lickers, right? Where was this? And then I learned much later, you know, when I was in high school, that Kauai Nui, not actually a marsh. It was once one of the biggest lokoi'a, or fish ponds, on our island, right? It's the second biggest fish pond on all of Oahu. And it had the capacity to produce almost 500,000 pounds of fish. Kauai Nui was this huge food basket. We had lo'i, we had lokoi'a, and now it looks like this. And I was so baffled, right? How did we move from this model of sustainability that provided food for hundreds and thousands of people, right, to this clogged and congested marshland that I grew up with, trying to search for that lepo'ai'ia? And it was the first time I really started thinking about the role of humans and management, and how we manage our ahupua'a, right, from mountain to sea, and what our impact has been on this transformation of sustainability into clogged, invasive marshland. And it was really these questions and this line of inquiry that shaped my career trajectory. I chose a career in research because I really felt like Hawaii needed skilled indigenous individuals who could bring knowledge of contemporary technologies, innovation, and science to bear on some of the most pressing challenges that we have today: food security, water sustainability, energy, right? That also reflected the values of our native people. And so for me, science was my mechanism to malama aina. Science was the way that I connected to my place, through kilo, through observation, so that I could help bring back the sustainability of these ecosystems that are so important and special to me. Now, our kupuna, they didn't really have this concept of ecosystem sustainability, right? Because they lived it every single day. All of their management practices were based on very intense observations and kilo. They understood the cycles of organisms, the movements of waters and winds, the biogeochemistry. And they encoded it all in beautiful mele and oli and mo'olelo. But we've lost a little bit of that ability to understand that now. Things have happened over time. The aina has changed to land, and how do we get it back to aina, that which feeds? So this is kind of my framework for how I think about going back towards ecosystem sustainability, right? Using contemporary science techniques to decode the ike left to us by our kupuna, all of our stories and mo'olelo, and how we can apply that to our management today so that we can manage our environments appropriately in the context of today. Like we have highways and on-site sewage disposal systems and Netflix, right? Like, we're not out there all day kiloing all day long. We're, watching The Office, right? So, for me, this framework kind of shapes how I study ecosystems from Mauka to Makai across the Pai'aina to move us back towards this idea of ecosystem sustainability. And when I think about that, I think about this olelo no eau. Ikava ma mua, kava ma hope. In order to move forward into the future, right, we have our eyes facing the past. So we are learning from all the wisdom and lessons of our kupuna and applying them innovatively today. So I like to ground us kind of in the po, right? I like to ground us in a Hawaiian understanding of the world. So I'm going to play and start with a little video, and I want you to listen to the leo, listen to the words. Does anybody know what the leo was? It's the first va of the Kumulipo. The Kumulipo, which is our Hawaiian genealogical chant, which orients us in the universe. It sets our time, it sets our clock, it really sets up the whole, how we understand the whole creation of the earth from a Hawaiian perspective moving forward. The Hawaiian genealogical chant of the Kumulipo is thousands of lines long. And this is the first va, this is the first little stanza, right? And it sets us up, starts from the darkness so deep, right? And from there, it's basically the evolution of all life forms as we get up to Kane and Kanaloa and La'i and man and all of the generations of Kanaka moving forward. But what I love about this first stanza is there's one line, O ka vale vale ho'o kumu honua ya. From the source in the slime, the earth formed. That vale, that slime, right? When I was a little girl, I was in that slime. I was in the mud. I was tasting the mud. And when I learned about microbes, for the first time when I was a freshman in high school, my world exploded into focus, right? Because I was asking all these questions about all these tiny, tiny things that you cannot see. And our kupuna, even though they couldn't see them, they understood their importance and their presence. In this one line of the Kumulipo, O ka vale vale ho'o kumu honua ya. From the source, in the slime, right? The slime created the whole world. And that's how I became a microbiologist, because microbes are just the coolest. They're the most dominant life form on this planet, right? If we were to count all the microbes on this planet, it would be 5 times 10 to the 30. That is a 10 with 30 zeros after that. That's a lot of zeros. There's more microbes on this planet than there are stars in the universe. And these organisms, for the past 3 billion years, have been the key players in shaping this environment for habitability, right? They've been cycling nutrients, carbon, nitrogen, oxygen, iron, phosphorus, sulfur, so that we can live here. Microbes created the oxygen that we breathe. right? So these tiny, tiny things that we cannot see play crucial roles in shaping our ecosystems from mountain to sea, right? And our kupuna innately understood that and applied that to their management practices. And so when I study microbes in the environment, right, they're unseen, but I study them at the intersections of Kane and Kana law. So Kane, we've all hopefully heard of Kane and Kana law, the two brothers with their o'o stick that went around looking for water. They're kind of our big Hawaiian deities, right? But they're also elementals. So Kane represents energy. Kane is a penetrating, moving force. Kane is the rain, because rain penetrates the rock. Kane is the streams, because streams penetrate the ocean. Kane is a male because, yeah, you guys get it? Right, Kane. Okay. Right. So energy, Kane. And Kanaloa is a more stable, healing, oceanic marine force, right? Kanaloa, the ocean. I don't know where we're oriented. This way, the ocean. Right, so all of these microbes that I'm studying live at these intersections of Kane and Kanaloa. And when we think about microbes, you know, I'm so sure that our kupuna know all about them, but how would they talk about microbes? How might they talk about these organisms that we can't see? And so when I really think about it, I think of microbes as the kinolau, or the physiological representation of Haumea. Haumea is our birth mother. Haumea is Papa, right? She birthed the islands. She represents origins. She represents intersections. She represents regulation. And so when I think about Haumea, there's so many beautiful mo'olelo about her. And one that comes to my mind, right, is all these stories about Haumea and how she is born always in the next generation. She's always reborn in the next generation through the mother, through the maternal lineage, right? And as a molecular biologist, when I really put my molecular biology cap on and I think about this story with that molecular biology lens, I go, oh, what is something that is reborn in every generation, but it only comes from the mother? And I start to think about mitochondria. Mitochondria only comes from your mother. So you have your spermies with the tail, with the energy, all the mitochondria is on the tail, tells it where to go. You know, it's very maternal, I think, where to go, right? And then your egg has your mitochondria, and when the bow chicka bow wow happens, right, the only thing that passes on is the mitochondria from the mother. So Haumea is being reborn every generation as mitochondria. And we think about mitochondria, I'm gonna ask you right now, and I bet the whole audience will say the same thing. What is mitochondria? The powerhouse of the cell. Yep, see, I knew it. Everybody knows that line. But there's more to mitochondria. Mitochondria actually helps to make a lot of decisions for the cell. The mitochondria tells the cell when to divide, when to differentiate, when to die. I don't know about you, but that sounds very motherly, providing some advice for the cell and what they can do. And so to me, that's very Haumea. And if we think about the origin of the mitochondria and where did it come from, right? So if we go back, you know, maybe 2 billion years into our past, where, you know, we just have our microbial soup of organisms around the place, and one organism gains the capacity to breathe oxygen, right? It's like, imagine if you had like Jason Momoa from Baywatch and he's cruising around with his skinny little legs, and then you have, someday he transforms into Jason Momoa Khal Drogo, right? Okay? He can move really big rocks now. He has lots of energy. Everybody is super jealous of him. Everybody also wants to go and give him a big hug. Yeah, I mean, I do. So one day, right, one archaea came along and it hugged this bacteria with the, we hug Jason Momoa so hard that we basically suck him into ourselves, right? So an archaea ate a bacteria through a process of endosymbiosis, and you get the origin of the eukaryotic cell. That's the development of the mitochondria, right? Origin event, Haumea. We think about Mo'olelo of Haumea. When she was here in Kalihi in human form, she and her kane lived in Kalihi, and she decided to go down to He'eia one day to collect crabs and limu. And she felt like, she had this bad feeling. She was like, something is wrong. I feel like my husband got in trouble. I need to go check it out. Turns out he stole some bananas. The chief was not happy and was going to him. Right? So she showed up and she did her pleading and she was like, no, let me just hug him one last time. And so in the process of her hugging her husband, she pulled him and engulfed him into an ulu tree. Endosymbiosis, right there, origin of the eukaryotic cell. And if we think back even to what that mitochondria was in the first place, it was a bacteria. The first type of living thing to exist on our planet over 3.9 billion years ago, origins of life, right there. Haumea. So that is how I put all of these pieces together to see microbes as kinolau of Haumea. It aligns so beautifully with all our mo'olelo. And though our kupuna could not literally see microbes, they knew of their presence because they kiloed, right? They observed their environment, they examined. And you can do a lot of things. You can nanakamaka, you can look with your eyes, you can look for different colors, right? You can hanukaihu, you can smell with your nose. I'm always smelling mud. I'm always smelling things because microbes fart a lot. You can taste, right? Our kupuna tasted the waters. And they described the taste of the water so extensively. And now we just have different tools to taste the water with greater precision, right? It's just a different tongue that we're using. Because my tongue is probably not as precise as our kupuna's. It's all that artificial sugar. We worked with our hands, hanakalima, right? And so because our kupuna understood and kiloed these environments, they were able to manage microbes across Ahupua'a through our water systems, our traditional agriculture, and into our aquaculture, right? Because they understood that everything is connected.
Everything in our aina is connected, from the native tree snails to the ocean whales. Environmental kilo, assimilated over generations, allowed our kupuna to understand the structure, function, and connectivity of all life cycles across Ahupua'a. Understanding that what happens up Mauka influences everything downstream into the kite. No snail, no whale. You see, the kahuli snail feeds on the fungus growing on ohia leaves to help the tree photosynthesize and grow. The shape of the tree with all its leaves, flowers, lichens, and roots help to capture the mist and the rainfall, recharging our aquifers and preventing sedimentation to the coast, supporting healthy, thriving breeding habitats for whales. Conserving these environments require Makatumukai management.
Okay, so today I'm going to share 3 little stories. Maybe not so little, but I don't know, you guys can decide. Right, so I want to start off with the thing that connects us, the vai. So we're going to talk about ikewai, the knowledge of water. And one thing I really want to emphasize is that science is not an individual endeavor. It is a kako thing, so I really want to mahalo so many individuals that helped with these types of projects, from the scientists to the community members and the kupuna and all the nonprofits that opened up their doors and spaces and shared their mana'o and their ike with us in order to do this type of science. So the story I want to start off with in water takes us to the aina of Kona, the moku of Kona. And here we are in Ko'olaloa, we're used to green, right? And imagine sailing into Kona for the first time, like John Papa'i'i did, and he wrote about it in the newspaper. And he's looking at this very foreign, dry landscape. It's parched, it's hot, it's void of water. Just looking at this, it's kind of astonishing to think that our kupuna, who lived in this aina, not only survived here, but they thrived here for centuries because they had a deep understanding and knowledge of water, right? Where to find it, how to harvest it, how to protect it and manage it for future generations. But like we said earlier, so much of this knowledge has been lost over time. And so one of the things that we are trying to do in terms of understanding our water, right, is we have to remember what our kupuna knew. We have to restore those linkages. We need to understand where this water comes from, how it's connected, what the impact of our current land management practices are on the yield and quality of our waters, and how does our impacts, right, influence the coastal ecosystem and the health of our native, local i'a. And so here's the thing. Kona is big. This whole area of Kona can fit Oahu in it 2 times. It's large. It has very complex geology. You have all of these different Mauna Loa, Mauna Kea, Hualalai. You have these different volcanic flows, which attribute to some of this surficial geology you see over here. We have some really interesting subsurface features. We have a rift zone that basically is where, it's kind of connected to magma, right? It's a little bit of a spreading zone. That's why we have so much volcanic activity in this area. And then we have this impermeable barrier, this high-low kind of divide barrier that influences the connectivity of water. And so in trying to understand water, right, we look at this space because where is the drinking water? And when we talk to kupuna of this aina, they tell such a fascinating story about how their parents would get in canoe and they would paddle out into the ocean, and then they would dive down with their ipuvai, their water buckets, and they would collect the cold, bubbling water that is literally coming out at the bottom of the ocean. This demonstrates that our kupuna had this deep understanding of submarine groundwater discharge, right? And they used this water off the coast in order to support so much of their activities on land, which is just astonishing to me, right? Our kupuna understood these places so well that they knew that they could paddle their canoe into the ocean to harvest fresh water. Now, changes in land management have really changed our engagement and interaction with water, right? As soon as we started drilling for groundwater and installing these groundwater pumps, we changed a lot of things. So the Hawaiians were very descriptive about water and tastes of water, right? You have the beautiful name of the Kumuwaiwai, the source of the wealth and the double waters of this place, right? Water is wealth. And so as we started pumping, one of the kupuna of this area, he talks about how once the pumping started, the taste of the water changed. All of these springs that he grew up drinking from, the taste changed. And then as pumping continued, he couldn't even find some of those springs that he grew up drinking. And so one of the big questions I want to share about today is really, how does our land management really impact the water quality, right? The taste of that water. And when we think about water quality, we're often thinking about chemistry. And that chemistry of the water reflects the pilina, or the relationships between the pohaku and the vai, the water and the rock, right? And it also relates to the management. So what we're doing on land influences the quality of that water. For example, when we have lots of agriculture, we may be using lots of fertilizer, which then increases the amount of nitrate in our groundwater. We also have our sewage disposal systems. We have a lot of cesspools. And these, in areas with high density cesspools, like in this area of Keauhou in Kona, right, we have high levels of nitrate from feces going into the water. And so, I'm not going to show much data, but this is one of those data figures. Don't freak out, it's okay. So these are basically principal component analyses. Okay, so I'm taking all the geochemistry or land management variables, which there's a lot, right? And I am basically shrinking it to 2D. I'm forcing everything to fit into 2D so I can look at clustering and patterns. So each of these dots on the graph represent a different sample, and all of the geochemistry or all of the land management associated with it. The closer the points are together, the more similar the geochemistry or land management is. The farther apart, the more difference. And so what we can start to see is that in terms of geochemistry, the sites that we sampled every single groundwater well across Kona. And they differentiate into two different distinct geochemical groups. There are wells that have high nitrate, high nitrogen values, and there are wells that have high sulfur values. When we look at the land management, these groups further cluster geographically by whether they're agricultural zones or right along the rift zone or more urbanized environments. Right? So this is what most hydrologists, fluid geochemists are going to look at. They're going to look at the geochemistry and they're going to make some solutions and hypotheses, right? But here's the thing. Microbes are actually really important in this system. They provide beneficial ecosystem services, right? Like they have the capacity to remove all of this anthropogenic nitrogen in the environment, right? They can essentially breathe in the nitrate and fart out nitrogen gas, thereby removing it from the system, cleaning it up. That's why we love microbes in our groundwater. So we can look at this geochemical and kind of land management data, and we can make some hypotheses about what types of microbes might be in these environments. So for example, in the red here, where we have increased sulfur concentrations, we think that these environments might favor sulfate reducers, so organisms that can breathe sulfate and fart out sulfide. In the nitrogen section with high nitrogen, those might favor organisms that can breathe nitrogen and fart out nitrogen gas, right? And then we made a hypothesis that because we have different land management strategies, right, different land management clusters, we're going to have different organisms based on the land management. So this is a canonical correlation analysis. Basically what it's doing is it's looking at the microbial community. So each dot is now a microbial community from a sample. It represents like 10,000 different species, okay? And we're basically plotting it in the same way, this ordination, where we're putting it on two axes, but we're plotting all the types of regression analyses, like the correlations you might find between different variables. And what we see is that organisms associated with S and N1, the reds that have elevated sulfate, those communities are strongly driven by increased sulfate, increased geothermal activity, whereas the green guys, more in urban areas, those communities are all driven and shaped by the on-site sewage disposal systems, the amount of agriculture, the pH of these fluids. So we're seeing how the environment is directly shaping the organisms that live in the groundwater. And we can dig into this a little bit more. Just squint your eyes and look at the differences of color. Each color represents a different organism, and we're looking at different types of metabolisms, okay? And what we actually see here is we found something completely opposite of our hypothesis. So instead of organisms that had the capacity to breathe sulfate and fart sulfide, what we discovered is that the sulfate in the system that we're measuring at really high concentrations is actually microbially produced. These microbes are breathing sulfide gas and pooping out a sulfate salt. And so this kind of shifts the whole idea of what's going on in our aquifers and changes how we manage them. This is really important for like water managers in terms of flow and all of these different things, because we're not necessarily controlling for the sulfate, right? We have to control for the sulfide, and then we won't get the sulfate. And so this is another one of those squinties. Just squint and I box them out, and we do find different organisms based on different land management practices. That was the most sciencey I think I'm going to get today, but this is a college level talk. I wanted to give you guys some hardcore science, right? And so what we really find here is that land management significantly impacts the microbial diversity, the functional capacity, which then impacts the geochemistry, which then has impacts on the ecosystem services. And this is really important because everything is connected. It all goes downstream, and the vite is what connects it, right? All of these submarine groundwater discharges, all of these freshwater, groundwater things support really important coastal ecosystems like Lokoi'a. I don't know how many of you have been to Kona, but they have so many different Lokoi'a across their coastline that are supported by so much water coming there. And if we use that water, right, if we're pumping out too much water for development of new resorts and complexes, there's not enough water to support these ecosystems. And this is, I'm gonna play another video to show why this is important, even thinking about the coast.
Alkaline ecosystems are landlocked bodies of water that have an underground connection to the ocean. Healthy alkaline pools filter runoff and provide habitat for the endemic red shrimp, Opai'ula. Opai'ula are the dominant grazers in these alkaline pool systems, moving between groundwater and the pools, feeding on microbial films growing on the rocks. Opai'ula are highly valued because of their role in sustainable fishing practices. Opai'ula were harvested from the pools, mixed with red dirt, and fed to schools of opelu. Many Lavaita families would actively care for and feed the areas where opelu would aggregate with these opai mixtures, ensuring a sustainable harvest during the open opelu season. The dark color of the opai'ula attracts the opelu, who rely mainly on visual cues for food, making them easy to catch. Therefore, restoration of alkaline ecosystems helps to restore coastal fisheries.
So sticking on this idea of coastal fisheries, we're gonna just move right into some examples from Lokoi'a, and like I said, it's a kākou effort, so mahalo nui to all the kia'i loko across the Pai'aina who have shaped my thinking about microbes and management. But we're gonna go right down the street. We're going to go to the Ahupua'a of He'eia, to this beautiful 800-year-old fish pond called Pihi Lokoi'a, managed by Paipai o He'eia. And these fish ponds are like an incredible testament to the ingenuity of the native Hawaiian people, right? Back in the 1800s, it was estimated that there were like 388 fish ponds across the state of Hawaii, and they could produce about 2 million pounds of fish per year. Now we maybe have like 35 fish ponds. And so these are models of sustainability that we can apply and innovate to move us toward into the future, right, as we restore these. And some of my favorite stories, if you guys have been here, you've heard this story of their guardian Mehanu. Mehanu is a mo'owahine. She's a dragon woman, right? She is the guardian of this pond, and her job is to make sure that all the baby fish are well fed, taken care of, and that the stewards of this aina share and do their job of taking care, right? So when you listen to this mo'olelo, the first layer is all about responsibility. It's all about how you malama place. And that's important because Mehanu has the capacity to hide all the fish from you. So if you're not doing a good job taking care, right, she will hide all the fish and you won't be able to feed your family or your community. Mehanu, they know she's there because, she's there for a long time. She has bodily functions. She has to go in the back of the pond at some point and relieve herself. And when she does, the hau turns yellow. And so when we look at this with our sciencey lens on it, when I heard this mo'olelo, I thought, oh man, I wonder if this has anything to do with nitrogen cycling, right? Ammonia, what's in urine? Urea, which is an ammonia form of nitrogen. I wonder if this is correlated with the nitrogen cycle. And so I made this hypothesis that, well, every time we see yellowing of our hau, and I don't know if you guys, driving up, all the hau are starting to blossom right now. Maybe it's associated with increased nitrogen or ammonia inputs in the pond. So we set up this experiment where we monitored the geochemistry every week, bi-weekly for a year, and every time the Kia'i local were saying, oh, Mehanu is in the pond, right? They knew it. We saw these spikes of ammonia, which is really powerful in that our mo'olelo are still true, and they are phenomenological observations of these spaces, right? So in that lens, it's a managerial lens. So if you're managing an 88-acre fish pond, right? You can literally wake up, go on the wall, you can spock all the hau, you see the yellow, you know there's increased ammonia in that area, and you can shift your management. Oh, sorry. Okay, so the next layer, right? Meheanu's job is to make sure that all the baby fish are fed and well taken care of. So as a microbiologist, I went in and I looked at all of the microbes during this time. And what we see is that during these spikes of ammonia, when Mehanu is in the pond, we see an increase in this organism called Synechococcus, which is a phytoplankton, and it just so happens to be one of the favored food sources of baby pua'ama, the baby mullet of the pond. And you can see here in the yellow, we see these big blooms of these Synechococcus that are correlated with ammonia. So we're using contemporary techniques to add to our mo'olelo and better understand all of the ike that's in here, right? That mo'olelo is about taking care of these pua'ama, about making the fish, and now with microbiological techniques, I can name all of those guys that play a role in the cycling of nitrogen. I can start to haku mo'olelo about these microbes right now and add to that ike so that we can move forward into the future. So in true Kiana fashion,
Nitrogen is a very important nutrient in the fish pond. The forms of nitrogen in the environment are nitrogen gas, ammonia, nitrate, and nitrite. It is cycled by both biological and chemical processes through nitrate reduction, nitrogen fixation, denitrification, and nitrification. The amount of nitrogen in the fish pond influences the rate of limb growth as well as decomposition. When Mehanu visits in mo'o form, her urine causes the hau to turn yellow because of increasing ammonia concentrations. This increase in nitrogen causes a bloom in the phytoplankton that the baby pua'ama like to eat. The fish are then well taken care of and guarded by Kia'i Mehanu, resulting in thriving local i'a. The story of Meheanu portrays the nitrogen cycle of He'eia fish pond.
So practitioners saw this video and then they were able to apply it to their local across the state, right? Now they knew that they could kilo this yellowing of the hull and realize like, oh yeah, that's related to ammonia. And so many people came out being like, oh yeah, we've been measuring that and we didn't make that connection. So that's the cool thing that we can do with science is we can start to connect and decode our mo'olelo and apply it to contemporary management today. So I have one more story on the Big Island, and I want to take you to the ili'aina of Honohononui. Now, when I heard this name of this ili'aina, I was like, Honohononui. Okay, so hono means bad smelling. Hohono or honohono, double bad smelling. Nui, great, big, large. Our kupuna named this ili'aina like a really, really big, bad, stink smell place. Hawaii. Why did they do that? I was so intrigued. And as I started to learn the names of all the local i'a in this place, they were also named with things associated with stink smells. Palaho, rotten, putrid. There is literally a local called hauna. Yeah, we know that one. And then there's one called Loko Waka, and it's this mo'olelo where like Pele was dating this Kane, and he kind of had eyes for this mo'o waka, and she was like, oh no, that's my man, and she was like, oh no, and he chose the mo'o, and so Pele was mad, right? So she chased them, and this describes all the lava flows during that time, but she basically chases Waka into this little pond, right? And I don't know about you, but I don't want to go up against Pele. She did not win. It was a battle. She died. And Pele literally left her to putrefy in this pond. So lots of smell imagery in this spot. And I was like, oh, okay, this is so interesting. And all of my ho'alohaina in these areas that are restoring, they were like, oh, Kiana, as we're restoring, right, as we're pulling out invasives, as we're clearing things up, the smell is getting really stink. And when you clean things up, you're not really expecting it to get stinker, right? Like that's like totally counterintuitive to your thinking. And so they were like, what's going on here? What are we doing? And we went back to all these names and we go, okay, well, our kupuna named this a really big stink place for a reason. Maybe as we're restoring, we're actually bringing back the hauna of the space that's supposed to be here. Maybe this aina was enriched in organisms that could fart smelly things, right? Microbes, like us, breathe and they fart, right? They can breathe oxygen and then they fart CO2. But if they breathe sulfate, which is very common in the ocean, they fart out hydrogen sulfide. So when you have the smelly farts, it's because the hydrogen sulfide, those microbes, they're farting for you. It's not you, it's the microbes, okay? So we had a hypothesis that maybe Honohononui had an enrichment of smelly microbe farters, right? And that's exactly what we found. We found a huge diversity of organisms that had the capacity to fart sulfide, a whole bunch of organisms that had the capacity to breathe sulfide, so we knew it was there. And when we looked across all these different ponds, we see that, almost 20% of the microbes in these environments can fart really smelly stuff, those orange bars, those sulfide producers. And we were curious, like, okay, well, maybe this is just a fish pond thing, So we went to the other side of the island, to Kona, to the Ahupua ili'aina of Kiholo, which is named for the movement of water, the shooting of water, Kiholo, like the shooting and the holo of the water. No stink smells associated with Kiholo, like fresh imagery. And what we'd see is we see those sulfide producers, they're there, but we see a ton of sulfide consumers, right? right? So we never smell that sulfide, which is why perhaps it wasn't included in the name.
The ili of Honolulu is named for its giant, stink, lingering odor. Many of the local i'a have names and mo'olelo that call forth imagery of foul smells. Haleolono, the battle between Pele and Mo'owaka, the local waka, and the rotten, fishy, putrid smells of local i'a Kapalaho and Hauna. These smells are a result of microbes breathing and farting sulfur compounds. Many microbes breathe sulfide gas for energy and oxidize it to sulfate. Microbes that breathe sulfate and reduce it to hydrogen sulfide gas are the ones responsible for that stink smell. There is a great diversity of microorganisms that can consume sulfide, as well as produce sulfide in this ili, and data suggests that they're more abundant here than in other ahupua'a.
So, yes, as we're restoring, we're bringing back this hauna, but what we also notice is that not all gases are created equally. Some microbes breathe and fart methane. So you know those loud but not smelly farts? Probably methane. Those are the methane farters, right? And what we saw was that in one of the local, which was super overgrown, it had lots of organic carbon in there, we had choke methane. We had all of these organisms that had the capacity to fart methane. And I'm going to let the video tell you the story.
I visited the Waiahole fish pond in Keaukaha to sample microbes. And the first time I stepped into the mud, bubbles charged to the surface, and all the fish caught in that bubble stream died. Those bubbles were full of a gas called methane, which is produced by methanogenic microbes who eat organic carbon and exhale methane. A wide diversity of microbial communities decompose carbon and produce methane as a byproduct. About 10% of the microbes at Waiahole make methane. The biogeochemistry of methanogenesis involves 3 enzyme reactions: methyltransferase, a methyl coenzyme M reductase, and a heterodisulfide reductase. In many of our fish ponds, carbon loads tend to be high due to the detritus of invasive plants. Restoration to remove these invasives help to decrease methane production, leading to happier fish.
So knowing about these microbial communities gives us some insight into names, mo'olelo, all of these layers that our kupuna intimately knew, right? And when we look at the microbes across all of our different types of food systems, from lo'ikalo to lokoi'a and all the different styles, right? We see that microbial communities are very similar depending on the type of management that they're from. Fish pond microbes are fish pond microbes, lo'i microbes are lo'i microbes. And what we're starting to see is that these signatures of microbes are actually still even present in archaeologically relevant sites that we discover. And we can use them to help us decide whether they're lo'i or whether they were once a fish pond, which is really cool because our kupuna, they just really understood how to manage the land and how to manage the microbes to create abundance. Now, as we talked about, land use and management changed over time. We no longer have this very connected system. We have different types of land ownership and land use, urbanization, but really the impacts of these activities have directly influenced our health, right? We see with increasing urbanization, we see increases in pathogens. This is a whole bunch of other work that I'm not going to share with you today. But our kupuna really understood that in order to maintain health of the environment, health of the people, promote the abundance of food, to maintain sustainability, right, is that they managed holistically from Mauka to Makai. So in moving forward, that is the type of mentality that we should have. We need to promote holistic and Mauka to Makai management to support the health and sustainability of our resources, because we understand Kalepo ke Kumuwaiwai e Hawaiian Kalepo i kai. When the source of your water is dirty, right, you're going to see the dirt in the kai. And so these ahupua'a of our kupuna are proven models of sustainability. And they manage them based on their kilo of the environment. And that is the way that we should move ikawama mua kawama hope back towards sustainability, right? And I see that you guys are starting to do that on this campus, right? Mauka to Makai management, riparian, restoration, agroforestry, and that's so exciting because this is a beautiful, momona, abundant environment capable of providing so much food. And so I just want to end with another dance video that, you know, because you got it, right? You know, in thinking about, you know, how everything is not only connected from Mauka to Makai, but it's connected all across the Pacific, right, in Oceania.
The name of Koholalele in Haumapua carries deep ancestral knowledge about the humpback whale and its function in our oceans. The humpbacks migrate from Alaska to Hawaii following the sun. In Alaska, cold, nutrient-rich water rises from the deep to the surface. This nutrient-rich water stimulates the growth of phytoplankton, supporting marine food webs. In the summer, hungry humpbacks swallow thousands of krill and small fish in one gulp, squeezing water out through their bathing plates. In the fall, the whales swim to Hawaii practically non-stop for 2 months, where they mate and give birth, releasing nutrient-rich poop and mucus sacs that support the reef ecosystems in Hawaii. Specific microbes from whale poop are important triggers for the settling and metamorphosis of coral larvae. In this way, the kohola has been long revered in Hawaii as a cultivator of abundance, reminding us of our ancestral connections to all of Oceania.
Mahalo. I talked a long time because sometimes when you get in Mo'olelo, you just lose track of time. But if you guys have any questions or if you have to leave, go ahead. But yeah, I'm here, so.
Thank you, everybody, for coming.